They mocked her for 3 days, called her a joke, put their hands on her, dared her to fly. Then the tower said one word over the loudspeaker, and every man on that ramp went cold. What she did next wasn't revenge. It was worse. Stay till the end, you won't see it coming. Before we get into how we got here, comment where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The gate guard barely looked at her badge. 6:40 in the morning, and Whiteridge Air Base was already sweating through its own shadow, heat rippling off the taxiway before the sun had fully cleared the ridgeline. A woman in a plain, unmarked flight suit walked through the security checkpoint with a single duffel bag over one shoulder and a laminated visitor's badge clipped upside down at her chest. No wings. No name tape. No squadron patch. Just a contractor's ID that read, in small gray letters, Flight Safety Evaluation, Temporary Access. To the 2 young airmen manning the gate, she was nobody. A box on a schedule. A civilian sent to check boxes that didn't matter. She didn't correct them. She never did. By the time she reached the flight line, the morning brief had already broken up, and the pilots of the 114th Fighter Squadron were spilling out onto the tarmac in loose clusters, coffee in hand, sunglasses down. At the center of the loudest cluster stood Captain Danny Reyes, call sign Ace, though nobody could remember who'd given it to him or why it had stuck, leaning against the nose gear of his F-16 like it belonged to him personally. "Careful, ma'am," he called out when he spotted her walking the line with a clipboard tucked under one arm. "That's a $40 million jet, not a flight simulator." Gift shops back at the terminal. A ripple of laughter went through the 3 lieutenants flanking him. Reyes grinned wider, playing to the crowd the way he always did, a man who narrated his own life because he assumed the whole world was listening. The woman didn't look up. She was already crouched at the intake of the nearest jet, gloved fingers spread inside the duct, sweeping for anything loose the way a surgeon checks a wound for a stray suture. She found nothing. She withdrew her hand, checked her fingertips, and moved on without a word. "Tough crowd," Reyes said to his lieutenants, and they laughed again because that was the arrangement. He made the joke. They supplied the sound. Her name, according to the paperwork nobody had bothered to read past the first line, was M. Castile. Her title was evaluator. Her rank, if she had one, wasn't listed anywhere on the tasking order that had landed on the squadron's desk 3 days earlier, buried under a dozen other administrative memos that nobody enjoyed reading. By 07:15, the flight line had already given her a nickname. It moved down the row of hangars the way nicknames always do, quietly, then everywhere at once. Ghost. Not because anyone thought there was anything ghostly about her. Because nobody could quite remember her actually being introduced. She had simply appeared, the way paperwork appears, the way weather appears, without an announcement. She worked the flight line for 2 hours that first morning, moving down each aircraft the way water moves downhill, no wasted motion, no hurry, no need to explain herself to the men who assumed she had nothing to explain. At the 3rd jet in the row, she stopped. She reached up under the leading edge of the wing and traced a line with 2 fingers, then pulled her hand back slick with a faint sheen of hydraulic fluid. Master Sergeant Owen Kesler, the flight chief, had drifted over from the maintenance trailer with a piece of gum working slowly in his jaw, the way a man chews when he's thinking harder than he wants anyone to notice. He wasn't watching her face. 30 years on flight lines had taught him to watch hands instead. "Your number 2 hydraulic line's chafed," she said, not to Reyes, but to Kesler. "Right where it crosses the rib. I wouldn't sign that jet off." Kesler stopped chewing. Reyes laughed from 20 feet away, not even bothering to look over. "We'll alert the maintenance gods," he said, and 2 of the lieutenants snorted along with him. But Kesler didn't laugh. He walked to the wing, crouched under the leading edge, and reached up to feel the line himself. His hand went still. He pulled his fingers back into the light and stared at the sheen on them for a long moment, the way a man looks at something that has just told him he was wrong about the rest of his day. Where'd you learn to spot that, ma'am? He asked quietly. She didn't turn around. Around, she said, and moved on to the next panel. The ready room at 800 smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, same as every ready room on every base Castile had ever walked into. Reyes owned the room the way he owned the ramp, chair turned backward near the front, arms folded over the seat back, holding court while the day's sorties got briefed. He decided, somewhere around the third cup of coffee, that it would be fun to test the evaluator in front of an audience. All right, he said, raising both hands for quiet. Since we've got a safety professional joining us today, let's get her professional opinion. He grinned at the room. Pop quiz, ma'am, single engine flameout, high altitude, motor quits cold. Walk me through the air start envelope. Airspeed, altitude, the whole thing. Take your time. It was a setup, and everyone in the room knew it was a setup. The lieutenants leaned forward, smiling, waiting for the silence, the stammer, the I'm not a pilot deflection that would let them laugh at her twice in one morning. Castile was standing near the back by the coffee urn, holding a paper cup she hadn't touched. She set it down. 230 knots, 18,000 feet, she said. Jet fuel starter to the green band. If you're below the windmill restart line, JFS throttle to off, then around the horn. Watch your EGT on the relight or you'll cook the turbine. A beat. You want the backup procedure, or was the first one enough? Nobody laughed. Reyes recovered fast, he always did. Lucky guess, he said, and moved on to the day's schedule. But the temperature in the room had shifted by exactly 1 degree, and everyone felt it except, perhaps, the one man who most needed not to. After the brief, Castile stayed behind and pulled the maintenance binder for the squadron's newest jet, the one scheduled for a functional check flight that afternoon. She read it the way a woman reads a hand of cards she already suspects is rigged. Near the back, she found the entry, functional check flight, signed off complete, inspector's initials, supervisor's initials, a date. Clean. Final. She flipped to the engine run log for the same tail number, same week. No flight hours logged. The jet had been certified airworthy after major maintenance, signed off as flown and sound, and the engine had never turned for the check that supposedly proved it. On paper, the aircraft had passed a flight that had never happened. She didn't gasp. She didn't scrawl fraud across the page in red ink. She copied the tail number, the date, and both sets of initials into a small notebook in a neat, square hand, then closed the binder exactly where she'd found it. She turned 3 more pages. Another check flight, another clean signature, another empty engine log. A pattern doesn't whisper. It repeats until you can't pretend you didn't hear it. She found 5 before she stopped counting, because counting, by that point, was a thing you did to convince yourself of something you already knew. By the second day, the base had upgraded her nickname from Ghost to Ghost Hawk. Nobody quite agreed on why, though someone claimed it was because she moved down the flight line silent and unbothered, like a bird of prey deciding it wasn't hungry yet. Reyes thought it was hilarious and used it constantly. Somebody taped a paper hawk cut out to the door of the trailer she'd been given to work out of. She took it down without comment, folded it once, and set it on her desk. She seemed to be the kind of person who kept things rather than threw them away. The mockery had a rhythm now, and Reyes conducted it like an orchestra. When she walked toward the ramp at 0840 to observe a launch, he stepped into her path with 2 lieutenants flanking him and put a hand up, palm out, playing to the small crowd that always seemed to materialize around him. Ghost Hawk doesn't cross the yellow line, he said. Liability. You understand, sweetheart. Can't have a civilian wandering around live aircraft. Somebody could get hurt. A pause, a grin. Probably you. Castile stopped at the line. She didn't argue. She didn't produce the laminated badge on her lanyard and turn it face up so he could read what was actually printed on it. She took out her notebook. 0840, she said, writing as she spoke, voice flat and even. Captain Reyes denied a flight safety evaluator ramp access during launch operations. 2 witnesses. She looked up. Spell your first name for me. Is it Danny with a Y or an E? Something flickered across his face, not fear, not yet. Just the small irritation of a man whose joke has stopped landing the way it used to. Cute, he said, and walked off, and the lieutenants laughed because he needed them to. One of them didn't. Second Lieutenant Priya Nair stood a little apart, arms crossed, watching the ramp instead of the show. She was 26, with the careful posture of someone who had recently learned that being good wasn't the same thing as being safe. 2 days earlier she'd written up a genuine flight control gripe on a jet, a real fault, documented, specific, and 2 days earlier she'd been told, in so many words, that flying it anyway was the price of staying in the squadron's good graces. She had flown it. She hadn't slept well since. She watched the woman they were calling Ghost Hawk write calmly in her notebook and felt something pull at her she couldn't name. Castile's eyes passed over her for just a second on the way back to the trailer. Not unkind. Just seeing, the gripe signed off under pressure, the flight that shouldn't have happened, the things Nair was carrying and hadn't told anyone about. Then she was gone, and Nair was left standing at the yellow line with her arms crossed and her stomach in a knot. By mid-morning of the 3rd day, the check flight jet was grounded, a red X in the aircraft forms, the kind of write-up that means this will not fly until someone with authority clears it. The gripe described a flight control rigging fault, specific and detailed, and it was signed with Castile's name on the originating authority line, as if she had grounded the jet herself. As if the meddling civilian had finally found something to justify the trip. It was clean work. It made her look exactly like what they'd been calling her, someone who gummed up the works to feel important. It also, conveniently, scrubbed the very check flight she had been sent to observe. No flight, no evaluation. No evaluation, no questions about the binder. Lieutenant Colonel Grant Ferris, the squadron's operations officer, delivered the news himself. Where Reyes was loud, Ferris was smooth, the kind of smooth that had never once been told no by anyone who outranked him in the room. He found her in her trailer, knocked once on the open door out of a courtesy he didn't mean, and leaned in the frame. I'm hearing you grounded one of my jets. I didn't ground anything, Castile said, not looking up from her notebook. Forms say otherwise. He stepped in without being invited. Look, ma'am, I'm sure you mean well. But contractors observe. They don't touch my jets, and they don't touch my numbers. He smiled. You found a chafed line. Gold star. But you're starting to cost this squadron flying hours, and flying hours are the only thing I get measured on. So, wrap it up. I'll have you on a plane home by noon. She looked at him for a moment, then stood and walked past him out the door. He followed, because men like Ferris cannot stand to be walked away from. She went to the grounded jet. She didn't touch it, careful, in front of the 2 maintainers standing by, not to touch it. She read the red X gripe clipped to the canopy rail. This gripe is fabricated, she said, flat and certain. Ferris's smile thinned. Careful. The fault it describes would show up on the flight control built-in test. There's no bit code logged. No rig check work order. No torque stripe disturbance on any of the hardware. She pointed, without touching. Nobody opened this airplane. Somebody wrote a problem that isn't there, signed my name to it, and grounded a jet to keep it from flying a check it would have either passed or failed. She turned to look at him. Which is it, Colonel? Would it have passed? For half a second, the smoothness slipped, and underneath it was something afraid. Then it was gone. You're done here by noon, he said softly, and walked away. She looked at her watch. It was 11:40. Kesler found her in the trailer 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway the way Ferris had, but he didn't lean, and he didn't smile. Ma'am, I need to tell you something, and I need you to take it seriously. He glanced over his shoulder at the empty ramp, then back. Ferris makes paperwork problems disappear. That's his whole thing. Numbers, gripes, hours, whatever doesn't fit the story he's selling upstairs just stops existing. He paused. And from what I've seen this week, he makes people disappear too. Transferred, grounded, out. You keep pulling on this, and you're going to find out you were never here. Your report evaporates. So do you. Castile clicked her pen shut. That's good to know, she said. Thank you, Chief. That's it. He didn't know what to do with that. He nodded once and left. She sat in the heat with a fabricated gripe photographed 3 ways on her phone and a noon deadline she had no intention of meeting, and waited for morning, and the flight she was absolutely going to fly. Kesler didn't sleep that night. He spent it in the maintenance records vault with the door shut, pulling binders one tail number at a time, laying functional check sign-offs next to engine run logs, and watching a picture assemble itself the way a bad X-ray does, slowly, and then all at once. Dozens of functional checks signed complete. Certified airworthy. No engine hours to match. The jets had come out of major maintenance, gotten a signature that said a pilot had taken them up and wrung them out and found them sound, and gone straight onto the flight schedule with troops in the cockpit, on the strength of a check that had never left the ground. The readiness numbers Ferris briefed upstairs were the cleanest in the wing, because the expensive, time-consuming, jet-wrecking step of actually flying the aircraft to prove it was safe had been quietly deleted and replaced with a pen. He thought about Lieutenant Nair. Her real gripe, changed status overnight. The jet that had flown anyway. He hadn't connected it to anything at the time. He connected it now. Ferris didn't just invent flights that never happened. He erased the ones that should have been grounded. A young pilot's honest fear, sanded down to a clean number on a slide. He photographed every page. He backed it up twice. And alone in that vault, he made himself a promise: whatever happened to the woman they were calling Ghost Hawk, the binders were going to outlive Lieutenant Colonel Ferris's version of events. He thought, too, about the way she'd found the chafe line in under 10 seconds. The way she'd quoted the air start envelope cold, without blinking. The cadence in her voice when she keyed the radio the day before, reading back a frequency the way you read back something that matters, automatic, perfect, the rhythm of someone who had said those words 10,000 times with her life on the other end of them. He'd heard that exact cadence exactly once before in his career, from a pilot whose name he wasn't allowed to say out loud. In the morning, he found Reyes at the coffee urn and pulled him into the equipment room, away from the lieutenants, and closed the door. "I need you to stop," Kesler said. "Whatever's going on with Ferris and that woman, stop it today." Reyes laughed. "Chief, relax. By lunch she's a story we tell at the bar." "She is not a story." Kesler stepped closer, and 30 years came into his voice. "Son, I have heard exactly one person in my life read a radio call the way she does, like the words are load-bearing, like she's holding something up with them. One. And you don't want to know what happened to the last man who got in that pilot's way, because I watched it, and it was the worst day of his career, and he deserved it less than you do. He let that land. If she is who I think she is, you walk away right now." Something almost got through. A flicker dot a crack in the performance. Then Reyes grinned again, because a man who performs for an audience in his own head can't afford to be seen backing down, not even from himself. "She's a nobody, Chief," he said, and walked back out into the sun. Morning, 0700. The cool wouldn't last an hour. Castile walked out to the jet in her flight suit and her worn gloves, helmet bag in hand, and the flight line stopped pretending not to watch. The schedule said the check flight was on. It didn't say, in the version most of them had seen, who was flying it. She did her walk around one more time, then climbed the ladder. Reyes materialized at the base of it with his lieutenants and a wider crowd now, fuel troops, a couple of maintainers, 2 men with phones already out, because Reyes had let it be known there'd be a show. Okay, this is good, he announced to the ramp. Ghost Hawk's gonna fly the jet. Everybody seeing this? She finds a chafe line and now she thinks she's a test pilot. He laughed. Ma'am, climb down before you hurt yourself. That's a $40 million airplane, not a photo op. Castile didn't climb down. Her hands moved through the strap-in, G-suit fittings, lap belt, the switch flow, in a sequence nobody on that flight line had been taught, because it wasn't a checklist order. It was a combat order. The kind you build when you've had to do it fast, in the dark, with something trying to kill you. Ferris came across the ramp fast, the smoothness gone, sanded off by a night he hadn't slept through either. Get the civilian out of my jet, he said to Reyes, loud, for the witnesses, building his own record. Unauthorized civilian in a military aircraft. Captain, remove her now. And there it was, bright and stupid in the morning sun, with phones already recording. Reyes went up 2 rungs, reached into the cockpit, and put his hands on her, one hand closing on her arm, the other reaching for the fitting at her shoulder to unstrap her by force. She didn't fight him. That was the thing nobody could explain afterward. She didn't pull away, didn't shout. Her free hand kept moving through the last items of the checklist, calm as still water, and she turned her head and looked at him from a foot away. She smiled. It was not a nice smile. You really want your name on this, Colonel, she said, quiet, not to Reyes but past him, to Ferris at the base of the ladder. Both of you on video, pulling a strapped-in pilot out of a cockpit. The smile didn't move. Go ahead. Finish it. Reyes's hand tightened on her arm. And the tower keyed up. The loudspeaker on the pole by the fuel pits, the one that pipes ground and tower frequency across the ramp so the troops can hear active aircraft calls, crackled to life in the sudden way it does, and a controller's voice, bored and routine, rolled out across the concrete and hit every single person on that flight line at the same instant. Ghost Hawk 1-1, winds calm, runway 18, cleared for launch. The ramp went silent. Not quiet, silent, the kind of silence with pressure behind it. The men with phones stopped narrating. The fuel troops stopped moving. The tower was working the real schedule. And the real schedule had a call sign on it, a call sign that was, at that exact moment, strapped into a cockpit with a captain's hand still closed around its arm. Kesler moved first. He crossed 20 feet of concrete and snapped to attention at the base of the ladder, and his salute could have cut the air. That's Ghost Hawk, he said, voice cracking, not caring. Silver Star. Combat Search and Rescue. You've got your hands on a legend, Captain. Get them off her. Now. Reyes couldn't move. His face did the whole thing in the time it takes to drop a coin, the grin still there out of habit, then confusion, then disbelief, his eyes going from her face to the pale scar on the wrist of the arm he was holding, then recognition arriving like cold water down the back of his neck. Then last, and worst, the horror of a man understanding that the worst thing he has ever done, he did on camera, to the wrong person. He let go of her arm like it had scalded him. A staff car pulled up at the edge of the ramp. A young officer in service dress stepped out fast with a folder under his arm, crossed the tarmac, and saluted at the foot of the ladder. Colonel, the general sends his respects and asks if you require anything before your flight. We have your orders and audit authority on file. He turned to Ferris, and his voice changed. Colonel Ferris, the general would like to see you. Immediately. Ferris had gone the color of the concrete. 2 security forces members were already walking toward him, unhurried, the way you walk toward a man whose legs have already stopped working. Up in the cockpit, Castile finished her checks, keyed the radio, and her voice went out over the same loudspeaker that had just rearranged every life on that ramp. Calm, load bearing, exactly as far as it needed to carry. Tower, Ghost Hawk 1-1, copy cleared for launch. Then, off the radio, down to the man frozen on the ladder rung, hands off the aircraft, Captain. I have the jet. The Czech flight took 52 minutes. She rang the jet out the way it was supposed to be rung out, the full functional profile, every system, the flight controls Ferris's people swore were broken and weren't, the engine they'd certified without ever lighting it. She found two real discrepancies, neither dangerous, both legitimate, and logged them honestly, because that had been the entire point from the beginning. When she taxied back in, the flight line hadn't moved. Most of the crowd was still standing exactly where it had scattered. What came after came fast, the way it always does once the first signature cracks. The Inspector General's team was already inbound, her tasking had never been about a single jet. Ferris's records were pulled that afternoon. The picture Kesler had assembled alone in the vault was assembled again, this time by people with subpoena power and no reason to protect anyone, dozens of functional checks signed and never flown, flight hours invented, readiness numbers that were the cleanest in the wing because the dangerous, expensive truth had been quietly replaced with a pen. Reyes's fabricated gripe, the one meant to scrub her flight and bury the binder, turned out to be the most useful document he ever produced. Time-stamped, witnessed, directly tying him to an effort to obstruct a federal audit. He had spent 3 days building, with his own hands and his own audience, the case against himself. And on the second day of interviews, Lieutenant Priya Nair walked into the IG's temporary office on her own, without being summoned, hands shaking, chin up. 2 weeks ago I wrote up a jet for a flight control fault, she said. It was real. I flew it anyway. I was told to fly it or lose my wings, and Captain Reyes laughed about it. I flew an airplane I knew was wrong because I was scared. She swallowed. I'm done being scared about this part. I'll testify. Whatever you need. It is a hard thing to stand in the truth when you stayed quiet through the easy part. It costs more, paid late. She paid it anyway. Dusk turned the desert the color of old rust. Castile signed the honest Czech flight report at the ops desk in ink, her real signature this time, rank and all, closed the binder, and squared its spine with the others exactly where she'd found the first one. She walked the flight line one more time, alone in the cooling air, past the jet that had told the truth that morning. Kesler was waiting at the end of it, by the silent loudspeaker on its pole. He came to attention and saluted, and this time she stopped and returned it, slow and exact, holding his eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said. 3 days I called you a nickname in my own head before I figured out what you were. You figured it out the first morning, Chief, she said. You just didn't have a word for it yet. That's not the same as being wrong. A pause. You photographed that binder when it cost you to. You warned a stranger when it could have ended you. Don't apologize for that. You're the reason this worked. His jaw worked. He nodded. Her phone buzzed against her hip, not the contractor phone. The other one. The one with no name attached to it. She stepped a few feet into the last of the light and answered. A voice came through, older now, a little gravel worn into it, the kind of voice that made everything sound fine even across a secure line. Ghost Hawk, this is Talon. A breath. They need you in the Pacific. There's a carrier, and there's a problem, and there's exactly one name everybody upstairs keeps saying. I told them I'd ask. I'm asking. She looked out across the flight line, at the loudspeaker gone quiet, at the jet that had finally told the truth, at Kesler standing at the edge of the dark with his hand finally down at his side. On my way, she said. She closed the phone, picked up her worn gloves, and walked toward the car waiting at the edge of the ramp. She didn't look back. She never did.